welcome to the Dialogue Out Loud podcast. I am Joe Plicka here with my fellow fiction editor, Ryan Shoemaker, and we are here with Karen Rosenbaum, author of the story Subjunctive Clauses, which has appeared in the winter 2024 issue of Dialogue, an issue about the family in LDS doctrine and culture. We're very excited to have this conversation with Karen, a longtime contributor to Dialogue. I'm going to read your bio here, Karen, and then I'm going to ask you if you'd like to add anything. Karen Rosenbaum taught English at a California community college for 34 gratifying years. From 2004 to 2008, she served as Dialogue's fiction editor. Her fiction and nonfiction have been published in Dialogue, Sunstone, Exponent 2, Iriantum, several anthologies, and her own short story collection, Mothers, Daughters, Sisters, Wives, published in 2016. Now she primarily writes personal essays and navigates the challenges of age with her husband, Ben McClinton. What do you think, Karen? Does that capture it all, or what can you add to that?
That's okay. That's okay.
Well, I'm going to add that Karen has published about 12 stories in Dialogue, which is, I can't imagine that anyone's published more than that. What do you think, Ryan?
Maybe Doug Thayer, maybe not even Doug Thayer.
Well, going back to, how long ago did you publish your first story in Dialogue? I could go look it up.
I'm not sure about that, but my history with Dialogue starts from the beginning because I was a friend of Jean and Charlotte England's. The summer when Dialogue was kind of starting, Jean was worried I was going to starve to death. So he made me office manager of Dialogue. And we hung out in Wes Johnson's office on the Stanford campus. And I made a terrible mess of things. I just did it for a summer and I got a job and retired from that. But
what an origin story there. You were the product of pity from Eugene England.
That's right.
Which then turned into a long-standing relationship and career with Dialogue. I was going to ask you, just because I'm curious, what California community college were you teaching at?
I taught at Ohlone, and it started actually in 1967. It was one of the smaller community colleges in Fremont. I live and have lived in the Berkeley, Oakland, now Kensington area, and so it was a commute down south, and it was a wonderful experience. It was great.
I'm sure it was. That's such a cool area. I was reading that word gratifying, maybe with just a hint of sarcasm, but I'm sure it was all good, also all gratifying.
Well, not all good, but it was wonderful. Relationships with students and with teachers were very gratifying. Administration, not so gratifying.
Well, not much has changed.
Nope.
Well, and if I could add a personal note, so I know this is the first time I've had any kind of face-to-face contact with Karen, but I know her as an editor. So she was the fiction editor years ago, 2006, when I sent a story to Dialogue, and it was later published from Great Heights. But I looked back today at all of my emails from Karen and her. I mean, it was you're just so generous, going through the story draft after draft and leaving so many wonderful comments for me. And that was I consider it my first big publication and my first Dialogue publication. So I just want to publicly thank you for your generosity all those years ago.
Thank you. Your teachers, it is what we do. We go through students' works, and I was able to maybe do some of that with the fiction editor job too. And I like that. It was an honor working with Levi. He was the editor while I was doing that. So.
Well, thank you for taking a chance on just a young writer and validating me and making that story so much better. So thank you.
Validating is the biggest part of teaching, isn't it?
It is thrilling when you when you have a student or someone that you're mentoring, and you can see it, you can see the potential, you can see the talent, and they're working hard. So it is gratifying. Absolutely. Well, Karen, let's dive into the story. This is, it's a short story, and it is pretty short. I mean, it's there's a density to it, but it's pretty short. And I will admit, the first time I read it, it rewarded me immensely on subsequent readings. I think the first time I read it, I kind of zipped through it and I thought, yeah, okay, I think I know what this is about. But I've enjoyed reading the story, like found enjoyment in it every subsequent reading, which is an indication that this is something with some profundity there. I know this is the question that, we tend to always start with, and sometimes there's not a good answer, but where did this story come from? I guess that's where we start.
Well, the issue, family connections to the church, has always been really major in my life. And I think one of the things you can do as a fiction writer is deal with things, truths that you don't write out in an essay form, You just kind of show things. And maybe because life is so complex and relationships among family members, especially with differing dealings about the church, those things get so complicated. But if you kind of show things, then people can make their own come to their own conclusions about it and say, yeah, I was there. I understand that. I know it's kind of a hope for understanding somehow. Different ways of approaching things. That makes sense. Pretty vague.
It's always never really fun to be put on the spot to try to expound upon your own work. That was great, because I agree. This is about family relationships. Complexity is a word that you use. I think that's what struck me about the story in subsequent readings, is the complexity, and the kind of the web, doing what fiction does so well, which is kind of bring you into an intimacy with the character that it's hard to achieve, even with people that we know in real life and in person, right? The intimacy that I felt, the knowledge of the protagonist's, her relationship with her husband, her mother, her dying father, and then of course this mysterious absent figure, Paul, who she's imagining over and over again. It's very compelling, the way that all those relationships are kind of packed into this tight little area. We should probably maybe paraphrase the story for anyone who's listening really quick. Do you think, Ryan, do you want to try that really quick? And then I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah. So we have Laurie is the protagonist, and yeah, as you said, right, she's seems kind of middle-aged. She's married, doesn't have any kids. She teaches school. My sense is that she's not affiliated with the church anymore. Her parents seem to still be active and have over the years kind of given her some kind of guilt about not having kids and, maybe not going to church. And yeah, Laurie's at this moment in her life. I think she's a little destabilized as her father is dying, and her mom is kind of reaching out to her for comfort. And what's so fascinating about the story is, right, these italicized moments in the story where Laurie is thinking about Paul, and she grew up with Paul. And it's not till the end of the story we learn that that Paul, maybe there was some kind of physical attraction. He cast a spell on you, Laurie's mom says. So there's these moments from the story where Laurie is just thinking about Paul. What happened to Paul? I mean, really, the only thing she knows is that he's maybe a child therapist in maybe New York or Pennsylvania. But all the rest, those italicized portions, are her just playing out these scenarios of what happened to Paul. And maybe part of our conversation, we can talk about some of those different scenarios that she sees for him playing out in his life. I'm curious about the form of this piece. Laurie in the present, and then these moments with Paul.
Yeah. Well, Paul is connected to her former religious affiliation. Maybe she wonders what's happened to him in his journey with religious things. And she doesn't know. And so she imagines all of these things. When I first wrote the story, it was a lot more elliptical than it is now, because I, of course, knew what I meant. And I ran it by Levi, I guess, first. And he gave me his understanding of it. Anyway, and I was also counseled by dialogue folks to maybe make it a little less obscure. But anyway, he's connected somehow to the family, to her family, and to her relationship, her past relationship with the church, which is different from her present relationship to the church. And part of that seems to have, she seems to have been attached to the church partly because of him in the past. And now that she isn't, she wonders what has happened to him too.
Well, it seems like in these scenarios, the way I interpret it, in one, maybe Paul never got married, right? There's Paul's kitchen are a dozen eggs minus 3, a container of yogurt, 2 cartons of Indian takeout food. That sounds like a little lonely. And then in another scenario, he seems to maybe be living out that perfect LDS life. He's married, they're both active. And then in another scenario, it even seems maybe Paul has left the church at their separation from all things safe and secure. And then, another scenario where Paul's wife is, maybe distancing herself from the church, and where he's still kind of staying active. So yeah, just so many, as Joe said, as I'm reading through it, each reading, there's these new layers of meaning that are emerging.
I'd like to just a moment of appreciation again for the technical prowess of this story. And Karen, Ryan read that line, and I'll read the one after it, right? In the refrigerator of Paul's kitchen are a dozen eggs minus 3, a container of yogurt, 2 cartons of Indian takeout. In the living room is a treadmill where Paul can walk and read Richard Dawkins at the same time. The density of characterization there, I would, if a student brought me 2 sentences like that in a workshop, I would think that they were, the best writer I was going to see all year. I'm not trying to blow smoke, but I'm just, obviously you've whittled this down, and these different kind of manifestations of Paul are all different, but you at the most take a few paragraphs to kind of sketch them out, and they feel in some ways fully realized. And another sentence in Laurie's story is she's talking about kind of her, how her faith has shifted, the questions that are asked, right, about suffering and who suffers. And anyways, you write these lines: some power that would ease the burden of one broken family and country, but maybe not another. In high school, she didn't worry so much about the anothers. And I thought, one of the most succinct ways of explaining and kind of representing a faith shift, or the root causes of those existential questions that sometimes, we bury, and that can kind of rip us open in some ways. And you do it all again by showing, without having to explain or kind of tell us all about it. Anyways, it was the depth of character is so delightful. I was going to ask you again, just real quick, the character of Paul is striking because, like Ryan said, I think there's this question that arises for a reader, for me, at the end of the story, which is, we hear her mom saying, "Oh, he was really important to you." He sat on her clarinet, which is kind of an intimate thing to do, right? To sit on somebody's clarinet. So they obviously knew each other. They were friends, and he cast a spell on her. But there's this sense in which the relationship, it's unclear whether Laurie is thinking about Paul because I don't really get the sense necessarily that she's dissatisfied with Dennis, her husband, who's, kind of a neutral character. He's certainly not any kind of monster. He's not very dynamic. He's eating, he likes to eat his meat and sit at the coffee table with his laptop. But I don't get the sense that she's dreaming of Paul in a romantic sense because she's dissatisfied with her marriage. So what you're zeroing in on, I think, is this thing that's maybe unique to a religious person, especially to somebody who has lost their faith and has shifted their faith, which is this need to continue to kind of process. And like through Paul, this continual like her thinking of Paul, why does she care so much? Why is she quote unquote obsessed with Paul? I don't think she's longing for him, but she's longing for something else, or still mulling something else over that Paul represents. Is that a fair reading?
Well, I think maybe many young people, their maybe religious feelings are tied up with romantic feelings. I mean, she's influenced partly because of her own feelings in the past. She was influenced to believe, and he's gone from her life, and she's having trouble believing. She doesn't believe the things that he had believed before, that he'd encouraged her to believe. So in my mind, I had it that it had been a romantic relationship. She was young, high school, maybe early college, and cared about him. And then they went different directions. And she's not at all dissatisfied with her husband. They share things that are important to both of them. But she does wonder how this is tied in somehow. What has happened to him? He was so important when she was young, and the mother sees this, understands that he was really important. He was there all the time in the house, sitting on clarinets and other things, ordinarily not on clarinets. But so that was my vision anyway, the story.
Yeah, I think it can encapsulate all of those readings, and this idea that there was something tied up. Her faith was tied up in this person, right? And and she thinks about that. She thinks about him. I will say, maybe as I think about it, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to set this story in 2001, because if it was much later than that, I think we would see her up late 1 a.m. on Facebook trying to uncover as much information as she could about Paul.
Some people are really hard to find on Facebook.
That's absolutely true. You are absolutely right. In fact,
or any place else, actually.
That's true. Yeah, you can look for people and things that happened before 2000, and you won't find it.
Yeah, and Paul's daughter is going to teach him how to text. So that definitely sounds maybe a 2000 or 2001.
That's right.
I thought with what the story kind of caused me to think about was, and I think when I was younger, in my kind of faith journey, I got some comfort, I got some stability from like these people I knew who I saw as kind of stalwarts in their life. And I think, I think I believed a little more because these people believed. And even when we separated, I would find some kind of comfort thinking like so-and-so is out there, still believing. And if so-and-so believes, then I can still believe too. And I think that's kind of I don't want to put it on a hierarchy, but maybe like a lower stage of faith, right? Or kind of a lower, kind of consciousness. And I think Laurie's parents, right, are still in that stage. Like they still see Paul as that potential general authority. But Laurie, to her credit, right, I think is more expansive in her consciousness and because she can imagine Paul as more than just that potential apostle. Like she can see all of the scenarios that might play out in our faith journeys, all of the directions that life might take us, both positive, both negative. So like I see her in the end, she is able to like see the others, the another through Paul.
And if he had been a general authority, she wouldn't have any trouble at all Googling him.
Yeah.
She would have heard about him constantly from her parents.
Right. And well, and in other things probably too.
Right. Yeah. Karen, what about the title? It's a little mysterious. Maybe some of us whose vocabularies are a little not as great would say it's. I know that in grammar there is, of course, I think such a thing as a subjunctive clause. Is this playing on that?
It's the what ifs. What if? And I see that as really central to a whole lot of fiction. What if it were like this? What if it were like this? So that's how I came up with the title. I've really had trouble finding titles for stories. Somehow, for me, they seemed like the right titles. And when I got that one, I thought that's the right title for the story, because that's what I was thinking of. The what ifs.
It's a great title. It's playful. It's representative. Yeah, some people don't bother very much with titles, I suppose. What isn't Levi Peterson, The Backslider? That's pretty straightforward, right?
Well, I had to go to Chat GPT and put in, subjunctive, right? It expresses hypothetical situation, wishes, situations, conditions contrary to fact. And right, it's one of those beautiful titles, right, that is intriguing. Like it invites me into the story, and it seems to have a level of meaning before I've read the piece. And then I read the piece and I go back and see subjunctive cases, and I just see those different layers of meaning, right? I see it almost typifies this story of Laurie playing out all of these hypotheticals that might have happened to Paul.
That is a profound thought, Karen, about, I think I read, was it James Wood? Somebody was talking about fiction as, or somebody kind of delving into kind of the value of fiction. Like, what is it for? Why do we as humans, and even in the age of film, what do we value in terms of, the written word and fictional stories? That it's this kind of, it's like a program that keeps running scenario after scenario after scenario, right? That we, not in a mathematical sense, but in kind of this more social sense, cultural sense, this idea of what is the most expansive view of life that I can attain as one single human living in one human body, it takes us there. So in a way, like the story is, kind of a microcosm for just fiction in general.
Yeah, I hope so.
I hope so. I think it's, again, in so few words, I think it's really enjoyable experience. What are you working on now? What are you looking at in the future?
I do mostly personal essays now, ironically. And they aren't, not real articles or nothing researched. That I somehow, one of the reasons I wrote fiction for all those years was that I thought I can kind of express truths in my life and other people's lives this way. And now I'm taking maybe much smaller things, really, really small things. Something will suggest itself to me and I'll write a personal essay about that. And it's pleasing to me. Anyway, that's kind of mostly what I do. Mostly the writing I do now for my, what I'm doing is personal essays.
And where are you wanting to place or present these?
I haven't. Every once in a while, I think maybe I should try to collect some. I mean, some of them are collectible. Some of them are probably too personal to do that with. And some of them maybe are, a lot of them are rough. Some of them are obituaries. When you get to be old, all these people around you disappear or they are altered in some ways. And so I'm kind of writing, in some ways, personal relationship with people, essays. And, so I haven't submitted very many. I haven't submitted them like to dialogue. That wouldn't be the right format. Some of them I could maybe submit to Exponent. I work with Exponent a lot. But I haven't done that either. But they would be more in that general. There are a lot of personal essays in Exponent. So that might be a possible place to try to present them. But mostly right now, I'm in a small writing group and I read them to my friends in this group. I've shared them with some other people, but I've not done anything with them. I have an enormous number of them, so I'd have to do a lot of culling to try to do. If I were to try to do a collection, I'd have to do a lot of culling.
I hope that you do, and not to be dark or anything, but eventually, if you're not here, you think you've either got to, burn them or tell somebody what to do with them, because otherwise it's like Emily Dickinson's poems. They're probably just going to come out anyways.
I don't know about that, but I would like to. I think some of them might be good for sharing to on a bigger audience.
Well, I'd like to plug the personal voices section in dialogue. Maybe you've got something that would fit there. I think we're publishing anywhere from 1 to 3 of those.
Those are lovely. Yeah. I've read 2 of them so far in the current issue, and I was very moved by both of them. The first thing I look at actually is the personal voices in the dialogue. Yeah.
The obituaries is a pretty intriguing idea. That is, like maybe an art form in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you giving these or showing these to the families of?
Sometimes I am. Yes. Quite often actually I am. Yeah.
Pretty great gift to receive.
Yeah. Sometimes works like that. Yeah. It's a way for me sometimes just to deal with the situation. In fact, that's why I write some of the personal essays anyway. The ones that aren't even obituaries, just allows me to deal with certain situations. And maybe I'm lazier now. It's a different kind of work than turning things into short stories. But
I would agree, as someone who's kind of gravitated a little bit towards the nonfiction form. Kind of started out thinking I was going to write a lot of fiction. I think in some ways it's clarifying in a selfish way, clarifying for me in a way that fiction isn't, even though there's something really fun about the game of fiction and kind of the puzzle of putting it all together. But there, there's something raw. I know I don't look very old, but when I read that part of your bio that said you're now navigating age with your husband, I thought, oh my goodness, I think I really resonate with that now. I don't think 10 years ago I would have thought that was me, but I definitely feel like I'm navigating something and feeling my mortality, maybe that's a little bit of my kind of need to write memoir, to write, write essays.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people actually have more respect for nonfiction than they do fiction. I haven't ever, but a lot of readers do, I notice. I encounter people all the time. I'm in book groups, and people seem to have more respect for nonfiction than they do fiction.
Because it's real, right? Because it's true.
Yeah,
Why waste time reading something that's made up? I've definitely had those conversations.
Yeah.
And the vulnerability is there, right? With creative nonfiction, with fiction, right? There's plausible deniability, right? We could
That's right.
hide behind our fiction, right? That this didn't
right.
happen. Not at all.
That's right. During the 90s, when the September 6th hydros were rolling, I was thinking, I grieved. I felt terrible about that. I knew I wasn't in any danger. I knew that the powers that be probably didn't read fiction. And if they did, they would have a hard time justifying that the author would necessarily believe the things that the characters were saying. The characters were saying such a variety of things. And so in some ways, kind of sadly maybe, it's a safer form of maybe expressing, as far as church things went, people who weren't comfortable in different ways. I've never been a comfortable person. And so people who weren't comfortable maybe with lots of elements of the church, you could do that in fiction, without any repercussions at all. And people who were doing it in articles and essays were suffering all kinds of consequences.
Absolutely. That's very clarifying. I think it's, and especially, I think for you were writing fiction, probably not riddled with lots of obscenities and
right.
violence and stuff. I do know a few people who were kind of pushed aside because of their fiction, but it was, mostly just in terms of, well, this is rated R, we can't be having that, but you can be subversive as anything, even if you're just PG, if you know where to look. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, go on, Karen. Sorry.
I was influenced a lot. By Wallace Stegner, whom I got to work with at Stanford, and he had such low regard for people who used four-letter words, which was interesting to me. I wasn't too inclined to use them anyway, but I think that really cemented that, kind of made me feel justified in not relying on that. I mean, he kept pointing out to us that, that wasn't very clever. You could think of much more clever ways of expressing yourself. It was boring. And I believe that. So.
I think swearing can be funny. And I think probably because I'm juvenile, but if it's not funny, I agree. Like, don't use it. If it's funny, maybe go for it. If it punctuates something in a humorous way, or if it's coming out of the mouth of someone who maybe wouldn't normally be saying it. But that's interesting. I am going to go. I saw as I scanned your list on Dialogue, something you must have written. I think an article or an essay about Wallace Stegner. One of a nonfiction piece that you wrote for Dialogue?
Yeah. And it's not that I object to other people using four-letter words, but for me, I knew it wasn't, it didn't feel right. And I did do that. In fact, his wife, someone had mailed that piece or sent that piece to his wife, and it did get included in a book that Stanford published about Stegner. So that was a nice thing that Dialogue did for me. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to go look at that again. I did do a little Stegner back in the day when I was a young, hungry reader. Angle of Repose, I think, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a wonderful book. Yeah.
Well, Ryan, do you have anything else, or should we start wrapping up?
Yeah, let me just, one final question for Karen, and it's kind of a big question. And so, I mean, you've been with dialogue from the beginning, and kind of, the world of Mormon letters, specifically fiction. So I'm just curious to ask you, what are some trends that you've seen over the years in Mormon fiction? And do you see any trends right now? Do you see it moving in a particular direction?
Well, I'm somewhat limited since there are only certain publications that I see. I do see Wayfarer and Dialogue, and Sunstone doesn't do much anymore, does it? And Exponent. So I don't see as much contemporary Mormon fiction as as you do, I'm sure. And probably with some of the kind of teaching you do, you actually even teach that kind of thing. And I haven't, I can't say that I kept up with it. What I have noticed is, certainly experiments that I think work really well for some people. They wouldn't work as well for me. I'd be less comfortable in trying some of the experiments that I've seen people working with writing. And I don't, I don't know. It's kind of hard to express. I'm not sure that I'm not a probably very good person to talk about trends, but I want to believe that people who want to write kind of within and without and kind of all around belief issues, particularly Mormon church issues, can do that in fiction and find a publishing place, however they're trying to express themselves. And I think that they can, the influences on them are very different, I think, a lot of them, than the influences on me. So they would be very likely to be trying things that I would never have thought of trying, or that maybe I wouldn't be comfortable trying. So it's not always, it's a good place for uncomfortableness. However, I've seen a lot of uncomfortableness, and it works.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your time here, Karen. And I think we would like, if you have a moment more, could we get you to read just a short excerpt from the story?
I think I'm in some ways like the italicized sections better than the other parts. And the first italicized section, in which the protagonist, Laurie, is wondering about Paul, was one that you mentioned, but the first paragraph of that, I was hoping would suggest that these are just what ifs. This is the first of the what ifs. So let me just read maybe the first paragraph of the story, and then the first paragraph of the what if. Laurie zips up her red jacket and curses God and Dennis. Except God probably doesn't exist. Dennis exists. He is right in this moment, existing in their bed, while she is dragging the recycling and garbage cans out to the curb. It is dark. It is cold. But Oakland isn't cold like Syracuse or Buffalo, Burlington. In the underground garage of his apartment building, Paul might be putting his laptop into the back of the black Volvo, the back seat of a black Volvo. His first patient will be in the office at 9. She is a profoundly troubled 14-year-old who grows her fingernails very long and scratches her breasts raw. Her mother sits in the waiting room, trying to concentrate on New Yorker cartoons.
Thank you.
Since I've always had an ambiguous relationship with New Yorker cartoons, that was
right. Funny, or are they not funny? I don't know.
I'm a Western writer, and I think some of those New Yorker cartoons, I've read the New Yorker for decades, but I think a lot of those cartoons are more understandable for people who live back there.
Absolutely.
I'm a Westerner.
I agree. A proud Westerner. Yeah,
Well, you're in Hawaii, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm very West.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. We are, again, gratified ourselves to have you here, to get you on tape, to talk about your work and your long career in association with Dialogue Magazine. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
So thank you for listening, everybody. Please share this episode or podcast with someone you know, or people you don't know. There are many other episodes to check out, fiction, interviews with other authors, poets, artists. Check out the entire lineup of podcasts in the Dialogue Podcast Network. You can do that by going to dialoguejournal.com. Dialogue Out Loud is produced and edited by Daniel Foster Smith, and our executive producers are Emily Jensen and Taylor Petrie. Thank you again, and see you next time.
Greetings. My name is Rebecca DeSchweinitz, and I'm thrilled to serve as a board member at the Dialogue Foundation and as one of the hosts of Dialogue Gospel Study. In each episode, which we record live the second and fourth Sunday of every month, we welcome esteemed speakers from a variety of backgrounds to share their insights and perspectives on the Come Follow Me lessons. Our aim is to spark meaningful conversations about the scriptures, to connect them to our personal experiences and to our understandings and explorations of the gospel. To stay in the loop with our upcoming lessons and this opportunity to engage with Mormon thought, culture, and belief, be sure to visit dialoguejournal.com and sign up for our newsletter. By doing so, you'll receive updates and timely links to join our live stream lessons. Additionally, you can catch up on our past guests and episodes by subscribing to Dialogue Journal on YouTube, Facebook, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Dialogue Podcast Network.